This is a real estate method that I've used to make over $1 million, but it's very risky and it's very easy to screw up. We're talking about real estate here, and real estate is inherently risky. And within real estate, this method involves creative financing, which, unlike what people may tell you, is 10 times riskier. Let me show you what this method is that I'm doing and how I'm still able to make it work for me despite all of its risk. So obviously the strategy is called the stack method. And to start, I just want to get you on the basics of real estate investing 101. Now, some of you may know this, but it will help lay the foundation for what this method actually is, because if we have a typical real estate property that's selling for $500,000, the way that I learned it with normal real estate investing is that you would go and get some sort of a loan. Typically, it might be something like what's called a DSCR loan, which for basics would be like an investor type loan. And that loan would be for 80% LTV. Now, in this case, LTV, what we're referring to is that $500,000. So this loan would be for approximately $400,000. Now, normally on the podcast I listened to growing up when I was getting into real estate was, okay, we got this $400,000, we got the $500,000 purchase price. That means that we're gonna have a down payment. I'm gonna put DP, a down payment of 100 grand. And you would have to go come up with this money, right? So you would save up money from your job, you would bring in a partner, whatever it might be. You'd put $100,000 down on this property and you'd go buy the property, right? That's normal. Well, then we get into the world of creative finance where basically anything goes. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. And people are coming up with strategies on how can I take this $100,000 right here and turn it into $0. Now, naturally, before I get into the rest of this video, I can ask you the question, if instead of putting $100,000 to buy a property, you could put down $0, would you do it? Well, if you're interested in buying properties, then your light bulb would probably say, well, heck yeah, right? Don't have to put down the $100,000. But how is that possible? And more importantly, is it safe? First, let's talk about how it's possible. So we've got this $100,000 down payment right here and the loan for $400,000. The way that people come up with this is they bring in a partner, or they raise the money themselves, or they save the money themselves, whatever it might be. But what if instead we could get that down to $0 using the stack method? And the stack method works like this. So here's loan number 1 right here, right? The DSCR loan. And then instead of putting down your own capital, you're going to stack those loans with a second loan. And in this case, that second loan is going to come from this person over here, which is our seller. How is that possible? Well, in order to determine that, we have to define some terms. The first thing that we'll define is equity. Equity would be the amount that you owe. Well, it really be the amount you're selling the property for minus the amount you owe, right? So this seller is selling the property for $500,000. They've got a mortgage on it for $100,000, right? So what is their equity? It's going to be 400 grand. What that means is that when this property sells, the seller is going to make $400,000. Pretty sick, right? That's why you buy real estate and then wait a long time. They're going to make 400,000 bucks when they sell this property. Cool. Okay. Now we've got our baseline. What if instead of getting $400,000 when this property closes, the seller says, hold up, let's do this. I'll get $200,000 when the property closes. And then the other $200,000 I'll do as a loan. This is loan number 2, right? And that loan does what? It'll cover that $100,000 down payment. And as you can see, $200,000 is a lot greater than $100,000. It means that it will actually put money in the buyer's pocket. That money can then be used for operating expenses, furnishing the property, repairs, whatever it might be. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but we're starting with the concept itself, okay? So the concept itself is instead of putting down that $100,000, we have the seller come in, take their equity, and give some of it to you as the buyer to use as your down payment instead, all right? So that fundamentally is the stack method. Now, hopefully, as you hear me saying that, you're like, that sounds very risky. You would be right, because most people just say, well, I don't know, but I'm going to make a bunch of money to buy this property, so let's go and do it. Well, those are the people that don't end up making it very far in real estate. None of you watching this are going to end up like that, because you're listening to people who actually talk about what happens down the road. That's where risk gets involved, okay? But that's why it's so attractive, obviously, because $0 down, you get into a property. You can do this on a single family home. You can do this on a mobile home park. You can do this on an apartment building, a commercial building, whatever it might be. You can use this strategy. You go get a loan, and then the seller gives you that second position. There's also multiple different ways that you can do this strategy, but that's not what we're talking about right now, because there's two more things that I want to hit on. The first one is me. If you don't know, I run my business as somebody who lends and funds capital for real estate investors. So why am I talking about this acquisition strategy? Where do I come in? Well, right here, remember we had this $100,000 down payment, and we have the seller over here that's saying, okay, I'm going to give you a second loan. This is the seller carry for $200,000, right? That's what we said. And that means that at the end of the day, the buyer, after closing costs, is going to profit approximately, let's say, $75,000. Okay. And they can use that towards expenses, furniture, whatever. Cool. However, this $200,000 that's covering this, that can't happen until after the property closes. It can't happen initially. Why? Because the way these deals are structured is that in order to carry this loan, the money has to actually exist first, right? And when does the seller get this $400,000 in equity, the $200,000 to loan back? Well, they get it when the deal closes and they get paid, right? So they can't actually finance that money until the deal has closed, which means what? The big star here is that whoever's buying this property has to come up with $100,000. Now, a lot of people hit this snag right here and are like, well, what the heck? You said that we could get into this property for $0 down. Now you're saying I need $100,000 in cash. That is a fat difference. Where did we get to this point? Well, because the seller can't actually loan this money to you until after closing, you do have to come up with this $100,000 to close the first transaction, and then you will get the money back. So in a perfect world, the buyer has $100,000 and says, okay, cool. But that's not usually how this happens. Usually what happens is they say, okay, well, I got to go find $100,000 and then I will pay it back when the seller does their seller carry. And that, of course, is where I come in as the transactional funder. And what I do is I say, hey, look, I'll give you that $100,000, which will help you close this transaction. And then when the transaction closes, you will give me back the $100,000 plus a profit. Now, why would somebody be willing to pay you a profit on a deal like this? Well, because without me funding this money, they're not closing the deal, and they're not getting the money that they're getting at closing, they're not getting the property, they're not getting anything, right? AKA, me, as the person bringing this money, is the one allowing them to access and complete this transaction in the first place. Pretty valuable, right? Especially because there's a lot of complexities that go into this. And that's why I have made a lot of money funding deals like this, because they're very detailed, there's a lot of work that goes into them, and there's a lot of capital that's required. So that's where I come in and make money. But what are the risks? What are the things that people don't talk about with this stuff? Because so far this sounds pretty great, right? You're telling me that the seller is going to be able to finance their money. The buyer is going to get paid $75,000 at closing. I'm going to make a profit on this deal. They're going to get to acquire the property. The seller's going to get to sell their property. Well, what could possibly go wrong, right? That's how most people think in the creative finance space, which is why most of the people that were in creative finance when I was getting started are now back at their W-2 jobs trying to pay off whatever problems they have come up with along the way because they weren't paying attention to this stuff. So I'm going to erase this full example and get into the real meat and potatoes of this video, which is what are the risks involved with purchasing a property using the stack method? Why is it so dangerous? Well, the first one goes back to the fundamentals of real estate, which is what? There's no skin in the game. Let's talk about it. What does that mean? There's no skin in the game. Well, typically when we do deals like this, when investors go out and buy property, they would put down that $100,000, right? So let's then say that they can't get tenants into the house, or I don't know, there's a fire, something happens, there's a family emergency. Well, they are heavily incentivized to take care of that property, because what happens if they start not paying on the property or something goes wrong? They would lose their entire $100,000 down payment that they put into it, plus whatever else went into the property, right? It would be gone. That's what you call skin in the game. Well, what happens on these deals when a buyer comes in, they buy the property, and they go in for $0 out of pocket, they actually get paid to buy it. What is their incentive not to default on this property? What is their incentive? It doesn't exist. They could completely say, oh, you know what? This is a little bit too much more work for me. I'd rather just go sit on the beach in Cancun. I'm just going to stop paying for this property, and it's going to get foreclosed on, and I'm going to get to keep all of my money. That is a very real risk and a very real problem with these things that people don't talk to you about. There's so many creative finance strategies that are a terrible idea if you do not understand the risks and mitigate them first. Because if you have no skin in the game, that can be a setup, a recipe for disaster. That is the risk number one. Now, how do you mitigate this risk? Well, you can and you can't. Okay? The first thing you can do for mitigation on something like this is proper underwriting on a deal. If a deal is cash flowing, making money, there's going to be a much higher incentive for a buyer not to default because they don't want to lose this new cash flow that's coming in. Okay? Obviously. If it's a terrible deal, then that's something that you can't do. Now, my job as somebody funding these deals is not to underwrite these deals. My job is to fund them. I execute on my portion. However, if you are working with somebody or you are buying these for yourself, you better darn well be sure that that property can underwrite and make money if you want to mitigate this risk. And the second thing you can do is vet the buyers themselves. Okay? You can vet the buyers as a human being. You can vet their track record in real estate. And this is another incredibly important thing that I want to bring up when we talk about something like this, right? Is it my job to dictate whether or not somebody is capable of buying real estate? No. It's the seller's, one of the jobs of the seller is to determine that they believe in that. But the other thing that just misleads so many people that I have to bring up is that if you know somebody that's bought 25 properties this year in real estate, does that make them a good buyer? Does that make them a good business person? No, it 100%, as I throw my marker, it 100% doesn't. Why does that not make them a good buyer? Because real estate is not a short-term game. Everybody treats it like this. I know some of you watching this have. People treat real estate like as a short-term thing. Oh yeah, I'm gonna make money when the property closes. And then I'm gonna cash flow, month one. It's gonna be great. It's a short-term play. It's perfect. And I'm gonna go buy all these properties. And people look at that as a track record and say, oh yeah, this person's bought 25 properties this year. They're the GOAT, right? They know what the heck they're doing. Guys, buying 25 properties in a year is not a skill when you have strategies like this that are $0 down. That's not a skill. What is a skill? It's maintaining the properties, actually keeping them cash flowing, putting tenants inside, building a team to be able to manage that. Can one person manage 25 properties? Not very well, they can't. And that's why when we're talking about vetting buyers and paying attention to this stuff, one of the biggest risks is that you actually have no idea who it is you're working with, or they don't know what the heck they're doing. Anybody that's a good salesman can sell you on the fact that they are trustworthy and that they know what they're doing. But unless you have a multi-year timeline, you don't have the proof that you need. And that is something that is going to significantly up this first risk, is not knowing who it is that's buying it or not having the property properly underwritten to make sure that it's actually going to be something that's making money. It's a huge mistake that people make. Now, the second one is lender requirements. Okay? This is huge. What I've learned with the vast majority, honestly, unfortunately, of people that are getting into real estate is that they do not care what happens next month. They do not care what happens next year. All they care about is making money now. And I'll tell you what, making $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, $100,000 now is going to mean nothing to you if you cannot sustain it. And if you do something that can put you in a worse position than when you were getting started. For a lot of people, just being distracted and not going out and making stupid decisions in real estate is going to end up benefiting you more in life than going out and just taking stupid action and going crazy, trying to get things done when you're not actually set up and prepared for it. And one of those things with the stack method is the lender requirements. Why? Because when you're closing these deals, I showed you the example of what that would look like, right? The lender brings $400,000, there's a down payment of $100,000. A lot of lenders will require things like you can't have somebody seller finance the rest of that amount, or you can't have this amount brought by another person. And what happens is that buyers will come in and say, oh, I just didn't tell the lender. I'm hiding this from them. Yeah, you can bring the money, but just make sure that they don't know that there's a transactional funder involved. And that can become fraud, it becomes lying, it becomes non-disclosure, and yeah, the property will close, right? And they'll be all, oh yeah, I closed this property, I got paid to close this property. But then a couple months down the road, a couple years down the road, the lender looks at the property and says, you violated our terms and agreements. And they can foreclose on the property, they can call that note due, right? The loan that they gave you. And all of a sudden you're like, oh shoot, I only prepared for the now. I figured I would just lie and get away with it forever. That is happening more than you guys know. And you should be scared of it because it is a massive risk to violate something that the lenders say, the people that are putting the money into the property, because I just want to make a quick extra buck, right? I just want to figure out, how can I make money now? This feels really good. Let's just go for it. I watched a YouTube video, so I know a lot about this stuff, right? Let me go buy $1 million property. Sounds dumb, happens every day. This is a massive risk. How do you mitigate this risk? Well, number one, you disclose. It's not that hard. If you don't want the lender knowing that there's a transactional funder involved, well, then you probably shouldn't be bringing in a transactional funder. But if you are bringing one, there's this really cool thing called disclosing where you say, hey lender, this is Ryan. He's going to be bringing third-party funds to get this property closed. And they say, okay, or they say, no bueno. And then you go from there, right? And if they say, okay, then a year down the road, can they come back and say, oh, we didn't know a lender was involved? No. Why? Because you disclosed it, right? You made it clear to them. Everybody wants to operate in secrecy, right? Just don't tell anybody. That just sounds like a miserable life, honestly. Like operating in a world where you're trying to hide stuff from people and all that. You can't even keep your story straight. Gosh, and I could go into so many other creative finance strategies where this is true. Sub-2, seller finance, wraps, all of these things that have so many faults to them that nobody pays attention to. It all comes down to things like this. Why the frick are you hiding everything from people instead of just putting it out there in the open? So disclosing is number one. The second thing for mitigation here is your deal structure. Again, it's in the name, right? Creative finance. There's a lot of creative ways to do things. And so if you're structuring your deal in a way that's against lender requirements, that's a problem. But what if you can structure your deal in a way that's approved by the lender? Well, in that case, you've checked the second box, right? They now have disclosures as to what's going on and they're approving of everything. And that means you're in a great spot. And there's a lot of different loan products out there that will do this for maybe a higher rate, or it's a different lender, or whatever it might be. You can do things the right way. This is always true. This is true in real estate, life, and everything else. There's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And then there's usually a gray area in between. But if you are hiding stuff from people, you can assume you're doing it the wrong way. And so if you are violating lender requirements, or if you want to avoid the risks of violating those requirements, all they have to do is disclose and structure in a way that the lender approves of. This is what we do on our deals, and it allows us to make money and continue growing, even though there's a lot of problems that can arise with something like this. And so that's the two biggest risks with these things, right? Is the disclosures themselves, right? Being clear with the lender. And then obviously our first one, which is just making sure that you actually have skin in the game, okay? Now the third thing that we'll talk about that I mentioned briefly with the vetting is scaling too fast, okay? This kind of ropes right back in with the whole idea of not having skin in the game. If you don't have skin in the game, you don't really have any reason to keep paying. You don't have any reason to follow through with what you said you were going to do. Well, scaling too fast can happen with the same thing. Why? Well, think about it this way, right? If we have property number one right here, and this property has a $50,000 down payment. Normally, what that means is that you're going to go to work for, I don't know, a couple years. You're going to save up this $50,000. You're going to buy the property. And then if you want to get into real estate, you want to keep building your wealth, you go repeat that process, right? And on that rate, you buy maybe a property every 2 to 3 years. You could say the same thing with house hacking or something like that, right? Every couple of years, you throw another property up. It's another $50,000 down payment. And you continue to scale your portfolio that way, right? Now, let's think about if you have no down payment, okay? Bottlenecks, right? We're talking about bottlenecks in business. If you have no down payment, switch to the blue here. We've got a property right here, and it was $0 down. Okay, so you have no money out of pocket and you just acquired that property. What's stopping you from going out and acquiring a second property for $0 down? What's your constraint? Well, what I was talking about over here is that you have to go save up another $50,000, right? And that might take you some time. Well, what if you don't have to save up any money at all? What if you're actually making money? What's going to stop you from scaling way too fast and have no idea what you're doing? Well, it's not the money anymore. It just becomes the properties. So if somebody is willing to sell to you that way, then your constraint is lifted. And that means that you can do another one for $0 down and another one for $0 down. And you can do all of these at the same time. There is literally no cap on the money that is being used to buy these properties. Therefore, you can just go ham. You can buy all these properties, and On top of that, if you're getting paid on these properties, you actually become incentivized to buy more properties because you're making more money. And at the beginning, it's like, oh, I'm making so much money and all this stuff is coming in. Again, why do I say this? Because I see it in the real world all the time. But then what happens? Well, now these properties that were $0 down do what? Well, this one costs $2,700 a month. And this one costs $3,000 a month. And this one is $4,500 a month. And this one's another $3,000 a month. And what ends up happening? Well, on those 4 properties, what does that equal? That's like a $15,000 a month payment. All right. Just on those 4 properties, you got a $15,000 a month payment. And what happens? Well, the first month, you don't get any tenants in there because you gotta get the carpets redone. You gotta clean up the house. Maybe you're throwing some furnishings in there. And so what happens that first month? You just go a clean negative $15K. That's in month 1. And then what about month 2? Well, you get 2 of them rented out month 2. And so then you're negative $8,000 in month 2. And then the next month, let's say you get them rented, but they're not making as much money as you thought. And so in month 3, you're negative $5,000. Now, what ends up happening here? On these properties, let's say you ended up profiting $100,000 from all of those loans that the sellers were doing. You now have this $100,000, right? But you take that $100,000 and you spend $60K on furniture, right? And that leaves us with what? $40,000. And then what ends up happening? Well, 15 of that goes to mortgage payments the first month, 8 the second month, 5 the next month, and then what? You're down to almost $0 in reserves, which you should always have in real estate. You're down to almost $0 in reserves. You've got these 4 properties, and what are you gonna do? You're gonna go buy more properties to try and make more money to then feed this beast that is going down. Instead, normally when you put down a down payment, what do? You buy this first property for $2,700 a month, and you stabilize it until it's making money, right? I say that lightly because I feel like real estate never really makes money if it's single family, but it's at least stabilized, and then you move on to the next property. And it's a huge risk for people to scale too fast. I have seen this take down multiple people, and I've only been in real estate for a few years. I've seen people go straight down hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt, ruin their reputation, which, by the way, if you ruin your reputation in real estate, you're done. Like, that is worth more than the millions of dollars. Like, that's worth more than anything. But you got to stay true to yourself. And the problem with this is then people might be listening to this and saying, well, those people are just idiots. They're terrible people if they're going to go out and buy all these properties and not stabilize them. Well, guys, there's a lot of people that just don't know what they don't know. Like, it feels good to buy these properties. You're told online on YouTube, like, oh yeah, creative finance, right? There's no risks involved. I'm just going to go do all of this stuff. And then I'm going to be cool. And people are going to be like, look at Ryan over here buying these properties. Again, if that sounds painfully true, it's because that's what happened to me, right? I went out and bought rental properties because people are like, oh, that'll make you a legitimate investor. And it turns out I lose money on them every month and I hate it. Okay. There's the truth for you. But either way, scaling too fast, that's the third risk. The way that you mitigate that is that you can treat these properties just like you would something that requires your down payment. Because even if you make money on this property when you close because the seller finances you some funds, that money is not for you to just burn on this property. It is reserves. Why? Because you're going to have to pay the money back. The seller finance note is going to have a balloon. You're going to have to pay that money back monthly. And if you burn all the reserves, where the heck do you think the money is coming from? Nowhere. It's all gone. You have to keep those reserves there. And that's just 3 of the crazy risks involved with this strategy. Now, does that make this strategy garbage? No, it doesn't. Just like anything else, it's a tool in the tool belt, right? Creative finance can be awesome when done correctly. And if you heed all of these risks and you actually want to grow something properly and do it slowly but surely the right way, you're in for a great ride. There's a lot to learn with this stuff. Being able to buy a property $0 down, and instead of having all of your down payment go to the down payment, it can sit there for reserves in case of emergency. Pretty cool opportunity. That can be really, really helpful for somebody that is trying to get started. But if you don't have everything in place first, then it becomes a major mistake. There's a lot of people out there making them. Hopefully you won't be one of them because of everything that we just talked about. And if you're somebody that's tried buying real estate with this method or many others, and you've realized that Airbnb is not working quite as well as you would like it to anymore, and properties aren't cash flowing with interest rates and all of those things, I made a video right here about what you can do in the real estate space to make money instead. Go check it out.